This looks a lot like 2008, but worse. In 2008, the world witnessed one of the most devastating financial collapses in modern history. It shook global markets, wiped out jobs, destroyed homes, and erased trillions in wealth. For many, it was a wake-up call about how fragile the global economy really is. But here's the haunting part. In 2025, many of the same warning signs that led to the crash are flashing again. And some economists are warning this time the situation might actually be worse. One of those voices is billionaire investor Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates. He has publicly stated that he's concerned about something worse than a recession unfolding in the global economy.
Right now, we are at a decision-making point and very close to a recession. And I'm worried about something worse than a recession.
Dalio warns that we may be heading into an era marked by declining productivity, rising geopolitical tensions, and broken monetary systems, a toxic mix that could challenge the structure of financial stability across the world. His warning carries weight not only because of his influence, but because he was one of the few prominent investors who accurately foresaw the 2008 financial crisis. While the causes and timelines aren't identical, the economic environment of today shares unnerving similarities to the years just before the 2008 crisis. From rising debt levels to inflated markets and over-reliance on central banks, today's trends are sounding alarms that are eerily similar to the warning signs in 2008. Let's break down the similarities and the differences between now and then, and what it could mean for the road ahead. Let's start with the similarities between today and the 2008 crisis. Rising household and government debt. In the early 2000s, US households were swimming in mortgage debt, much of it tied to risky subprime loans. Interest rates were low, borrowing was easy, and millions of Americans were encouraged to take out loans they couldn't realistically afford. By 2008, the consequences of this debt-fueled spending spree came crashing down. Fast forward to 2023 to 2025, and the debt problem hasn't gone away, it's evolved. Household debt remains high, but the more concerning figure is government debt. The United States is now burdened with approximately $36.2 to $36.7 trillion in national debt as of late July 2025. Across the globe, countries are borrowing at unsustainable levels. Meanwhile, corporate debt is also surging, especially among highly leveraged companies kept afloat by years of ultra-low interest rates. High debt levels, whether personal, corporate, or national, make the system fragile. One unexpected shock, a war, a recession, or a major default, could trigger a cascade effect that disrupts global stability. Another similarity is overconfidence in asset markets. In 2008, real estate was the darling of the markets. People believed property values would only go up. Houses were being flipped like trading cards, and financial institutions were betting heavily on this belief. Today, that overconfidence has spread beyond real estate. Tech stocks have reached dizzying valuations, cryptocurrencies have surged and crashed in wild cycles. Even luxury goods and collectibles like watches and artwork have seen speculative price bubbles. Why? Because many investors now believe that central banks will always rescue the markets. But as history shows, confidence built on false assumptions is incredibly dangerous. When asset prices detach from economic fundamentals, a painful correction is usually just around the corner. A third similarity is loose monetary policy followed by sharp tightening. Before the 2008 crash, central banks, especially the US Federal Reserve, kept interest rates very low for years. This encouraged borrowing and speculation. But when inflation concerns eventually forced rates to rise, the financial system couldn't handle the pressure. We saw a similar cycle after 2020. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, central banks flooded markets with cheap money. Rates stayed at or near zero and asset prices soared. But as inflation surged in 2022 and 2023, policymakers hit the brakes hard. Interest rates shot up rapidly, and many sectors that had grown used to easy money began to falter. The rapid shift from a low rate to a high rate environment can be brutal. In fact, the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in 2023 was a chilling reminder of how fragile some institutions have become in a high-rate world. Another similarity is hidden risk in financial institutions. One of the major triggers of the 2008 crash was the discovery that many banks were loaded with toxic assets, mortgage-backed securities that were worth far less than advertised. Once the truth came out, panic ensued. Today, we're facing a different but equally opaque threat. Private equity firms, hedge funds, and non-bank financial institutions hold trillions in leveraged loans, high-yield debt, and derivatives. These entities are less regulated and less transparent than traditional banks. Even major players like JP Chase and BlackRock have expressed concerns. JP Morgan's CEO Jamie Dimon has cautioned about potential fallout in commercial real estate and credit markets.
Personally, I don't like making forecasts, stuff like that. I am not a buyer of credit today.
While BlackRock has warned of systemic fragilities in shadow banking and liquidity mismatches, when the giants of global finance start issuing warnings, it's worth paying attention. In short, we might not fully know where today's financial landmines are until they explode. The fifth and final similarity is an over-reliance on central banks. In both 2008 and today, there's a deep reliance on central banks to stabilize markets, stimulate growth, and save the day when things go wrong. But here's the catch: in 2025, central banks are far more constrained now than they were then. Why? Because inflation is back. After decades of low inflation, price surges in energy, food, and housing have forced central banks to tighten policy, not loosen it. They can't just pump money into the economy without risking further inflation. That means their ability to act as economic firefighters is limited just when we may need them most. Now let's look at some key differences from 2008. To be fair, it's not all the same. There are important differences between 2025 and 2008 that could alter how any potential crisis unfolds. First and foremost, the bubble isn't just in housing. In 2008, the housing sector was ground zero. Risky mortgages and real estate speculation were the match that lit the fire. Today, while housing markets in places like Canada, Australia, and the UK appear overheated, the real vulnerabilities may lie elsewhere, like in corporate credit, commercial real estate, and tech valuations. The bubbles are more spread out, which could make the impact more dispersed, but still dangerous. The second difference is there are now stronger bank capital requirements. After the 2008 crash, regulators implemented major reforms to make banks more resilient. Capital buffers were raised, stress tests became routine, risky practices were curtailed, at least to a degree. That means big banks today are generally better equipped to handle shocks. However, that doesn't mean the entire financial system is safe. Many of the riskiest bets have simply migrated outside traditional banks. The third difference is that there are different trigger risks. In 2008, the crisis was mainly financial in nature. Today, the threats are broader. Escalating global conflict, supply chain disruptions, energy shortages, and political instability are all in play. Events like the war in Ukraine, tension in the Middle East, and China's slowing economy could all serve as the spark that sets off a broader financial chain reaction. So why should we care? Because we're entering what some analysts are calling a rolling crisis era. Instead of one big collapse like in 2008, we could see a series of smaller interconnected crises, each one triggering the next. One sector falters, then another. One country defaults, others follow. A recession begins in one region and spreads globally. And the tools that once worked, slashing rates, printing money, bailing out institutions, may not be as effective now. The 2008 crash taught us that economic fragility often builds in silence. Things look fine on the surface until they aren't. That's why it's so important to pay attention to the patterns.